Welcome to Harlow on Healthcare. I'm David Harlow, and I invite you to join me by my virtual hearth as I sit down with healthcare leaders to discuss building the future of healthcare. Today, my guest is Dr. Nick Van Terheyden. As Chief Medical Officer at BaseHealth, Dr. Nick serves as the voice of the physician at the company. He provides strategic insights in product development and marketing as BaseHealth brings a predictive, evidence-based, and data-driven population health management platform to market. A graduate of the Royal Free Hospital School of Medicine, University of London, Dr. Nick is a pioneer in healthcare technology. After a number of years as medical practitioner in London and Australia, he was involved in developing the first electronic medical record in the early 90s, and later served as a business leader in one of the first speech recognition companies. He's worked across the country and around the globe with a broad array of healthcare provider organizations and technology firms. You can find Dr. Nick on Twitter at Dr. Nick1. That's DRNIC number 1, and BaseHealth at basehealth.com. Welcome, Nick. It's a pleasure to speak with you today.
David, it's always a pleasure to sit down and chat with you, so thanks for having me on the show.
Did I miss anything? Anything else you'd like to say about yourself or BaseHealth?
Good Lord, there's always so much to share and so many exciting things going on, but it was a tremendous summary, and I certainly appreciate the outline. You know, when it comes to BaseHealth, I would say they're really sort of taking a new look at the healthcare population that has been a significant challenge and trying to turn some of the concepts on its head. It's not a sort of broad focus across the widest population. It really takes the individual patient and works from the ground up to produce a population health that focuses on individual patients for the maximum benefit for the patients and also for the healthcare institutions.
So BaseHealth is working on population health. So what does that mean? That means a lot of things to a lot of different people. What does that mean to BaseHealth?
Yeah, so I think that's an important point around this. So BaseHealth is absolutely a term that people use frequently, population health, looking at the sort of broad groups of population and how do you address individuals within that, and typically sort of focused on disease. So we talk about cardiac disease patients in our population. BaseHealth has really taken a completely different approach. So we really try and design this from the ground up. So we focus on the individual patient and specifically around what we've termed the invisible patient. The invisible patient, also known as rising risk, is the individual that we all know exists in that pool, that is going to have some form of catastrophic clinical interaction with the healthcare system, but we don't know about it. They haven't shown up, or maybe they've touched the system in little places around the periphery, but the first time we really become aware of them is when they show up in my emergency room and, you know, present with some very significant clinical problems. So imagine that with a myocardial infarction as an example. And then they end up having treatments that are both costly and very significant from a health standpoint, such as stent placement, and, you know, descend typically into this spiral of sort of poor health, high cost, and, you know, really a very poor outcome. And what we do is we find that patient before that takes place. That's really a revolution in this space, and certainly is in my mind. It's why I went to medical school. I went to find those individual patients that essentially look like that individual, and I want to play some intervention. I want to guide them and provide them with the best possible choices and care opportunities, you know, hopefully to actually prevent that disease from occurring, but if not, at least to mitigate it and reduce the impact. So if we got to that patient before they showed up in the emergency room, we discover that, you know, they potentially had very high blood pressure. They're likely to have a high body mass index, so some level of obesity. They probably have some level of lipid challenges in their bloodstream. All of those things we can pick up, but the problem is they don't show up, and we are challenged finding them until they sort of present. The best example.
To me, this sounds like the Holy Grail, and we'd all love to see this kind of information, to have these kinds of insights.
And that's precisely the reason that I was so excited to join this organization. It really is. It's the Holy Grail for the physician, because those are the patients that you want. It's the Holy Grail for the patient because they want to be treated. And put to one side a second the fact that we're all a little bit like ostriches. We tend to sort of stick our head in the sand and say, no, I don't want to face the fact that I have healthcare challenges. But ultimately we know that intervention early is the best possible choice. So we know that very clearly with cancer treatments, for example. But get over that aspect. So there's some initial challenge with sort of presenting this data and interacting with those patients. But once you absorb it and say, you accept that there's some challenges, it ultimately is exactly what patients want. And then finally, from a sort of financial standpoint, it's what the healthcare systems and the payers want, because it's better, more cost-effective medicine. So that's why, for me, it's really the most exciting opportunity that I've seen, and something that really got me very fired up. And, as I think about those individuals and those patients, I'm always sort of challenged with the presence of this sort of ongoing flow of patients that come through my door, and many of them need care and are looking for support. But how do I pick them out? And quite often they look very similar. It's very difficult to tease out those individuals, and you need to spend some time and maybe do some additional investigations. What we at BaseHealth do is we use data, but we use it in a slightly different way, and it's worth explaining this. So in the first instance, what they did was they took the PubMed database, 150-odd million articles of all that knowledge and science, proven evidence-based medicine, and they absorbed it and put it into a machine learning knowledge base that we use. That's the foundation of everything. That's significant because, interestingly, you saw the relatively recent guidelines around hypertension and the new guidance that's lowered those. That's something that in the BaseHealth data, we already see. We know that from the evidence, but you probably know as well as I do that evidence takes too long to get applied to patients. So what's typically happening is we decide and understand from the evidence that, for instance, cardiac patients should be given an aspirin and a beta blocker as soon as there's any question. Well, that evidence and that treatment took 15 to 20 years to reach regular clinical practice. And, there's lots of reasons for that. So what we do is we find it, we've got all of this, and that's the foundation. And then we take the broader picture. So instead of just looking at claims data, which is like looking in the rearview mirror as you're driving down the highway, imagine how risky that would be, and we take additional pieces of data. We take electronic medical record information. We'll take the pharmacy and prescribing information. We'll take the appointment data. We'll take anything that exists, and we assemble that into a tool that it looks at all of this, and where there are pieces missing, and this is really one of the key tricks here. So, a lot of these patients, because they're so infrequent or we don't touch them, we've got a lot of missing data. What the majority of population health tools do is they take averages. The problem is there is no average patient. There is no average medicine. We're really moving to this precision-based approach. So what we do is we actually insert data that is individualized to that patient, and we fill it out in a way that is much more accurate for the missing data elements, and that produces this highly accurate targeting for individuals that we predict will descend into this spiral of health and declining health. And that's at a 0.9 C-stat level. So I want to say that again, because for me this was one of the sort of revelations that really got me pumped up. 0.9 C-stat. That's a 90% accuracy of identifying these individuals. That's almost unheard of in the industry. And that really sort of represents a new opportunity. So now as a physician, I may have 100 patients waiting to see me, but now I can focus in specific areas. So I'm not, suggesting that we don't focus on the other patients and don't do all the wellness and so forth. But this organizes everything so that now the patients that I see first are the ones that need the intervention soonest and are going to benefit the most. And that offers an opportunity for the clinician to really deliver value, the patients to get the maximum value, and for the healthcare payer and the healthcare system to get the maximum value for their spend. That saves money in the long run, and then what it does is it frees up more resources to spend on these other patients who are maybe not as sick, but struggling to get any attention or focus in the healthcare system. That's fantastic medicine. It's the medicine I want to practice and deliver to my colleagues and into the system.
Well, I hear the excitement, and I hear how fantastic you feel this is. The question for me is, how close are we to implementing any part of this in clinical practice, and how can this sort of approach be integrated with incentives provided by payers in order to focus the attention of the physician in a way that's most productive on the patients who need it the most?
Right. So pick up the first question. So, how close are we? We're already there. It's a beautiful thing. So Banner Health is our primary customer. They reviewed all of the various programs and what I would call lookalike ideas around population health, compared us, and, we're absolutely intrigued. And, like many sort of looked at this and said, well, yeah, that sounds way too good to be true. So what did they do? They gave it as a blinded set, 2014, 2015, or it could be 2015, 2016, I forget. But of that population, their existing data. So it's historical data. We didn't know what had happened with those patients, and we ran it through the algorithm. And then we compared our predictions against what actually happened and also against the existing predictions that they had tried to use to predict what was going to happen with those patients. We were far in excess. I mean, just extraordinarily high predictive nature, this 0.9 C-stat. That was, a watershed moment for them because at that point you could see, here's the value. So they're now implementing this, and what they have in place is a program that's focusing on their Medicare Advantage population. They are focusing on some specific disease groups. So they're going after this, for instance, after coronary artery disease and diabetes, and they're identifying those patients proactively. And then they have an action plan and team that essentially uses those lists. And it's kind of interesting how they do this. So I talked about that sort of inference of missing data. So the first thing they do is they fill in the gaps. So they reach out to the plan participants and say, hey, we've got a program. It's no cost to you. And that's a key element to this because obviously for patients, particularly in that group, when the healthcare system says, we want you to come in, more often than not, that's a cost incurred. But in this particular instance, it's worth them investing. It's the same reason that we want to get Uber to bring patients to the clinic where, that's money well spent. So they bring them in or indeed sometimes just get them to the laboratory or to an assessment point, not always with physicians but with a coordinated team, and they fill in the gaps. So they might get some laboratory values, HbA1c, lipid levels and so forth, get some blood pressure measurements, all of that. And what that does is it validates or invalidates the prediction. And what they've found is, of course, that, at a 0.9 C-stat, the vast majority of those patients are now confirmed. And you go, good Lord, we've really got to do something here based on all of that. That's a fantastic thing from a financial standpoint because you've now leveled up that patient to an appropriate level of risk. One of the challenges that we have with the financial system is you're not getting paid appropriately because we don't really know that that's a high-risk patient. But now you level them up. But more importantly, you now put them into the program that says, gosh, they have a significant problem, and we can do something. And the BaseHealth algorithm, another bonus here is that it provides the most impactful intervention that you could deliver for that patient, customized to the individual. So for some of them, it may be putting them on a statin, for instance. Others, intervention around diabetes. Some are harder than others. But what's interesting about this is it's rank ordered from an intervention standpoint. This intervention will have the maximum impact. And, of course, a lot of these patients have chronic disease and multiples. So it's measuring it across all of those. And it allows them to sort of, hey, if we do one thing, let's do this, but there's a bigger list. And they're going after them, playing that intervention, and we're starting to see the data from that. And already it's exciting. So that's the first instance. It's in action and delivering value.
If you're just tuning in, this is Harlow on Healthcare, coming to you on Healthcare Now Radio. I'm David Harlow, and my guest today is Dr. Nick of BaseHealth.
Your second question was about the integration of this concept and how you incentivize via the payers to the physicians. And, again, the important aspect in our healthcare system is making sure that the incentives line up. I mean, the first thing I would say in response to that is that ultimately this incentive lines up for everybody because it's delivering the thing that we all want to do, which is be proactive in the healthcare system and deliver the best value for that healthcare dollar spend. From a clinician standpoint, I think one of the key challenges we've had with many of these population health programs is it's just another list. Oh, great, I've got to see this list of patients. And, more often than not, what happens is the patients show up, they're not really sure why they're there. The difference with this program is that that patient shows up and they're already worked up, so we've filled in all the data, we've confirmed. But most importantly, and I personally love this point especially, it's passed across with the evidence. So this isn't just, hey, you need to do the following things. We're not turning clinics, physicians, the clinical team into, production facilities. We're using the intelligence and the expertise of those individuals to say, hey, this is the patient we identified. This is number one from an intervention opportunity. And here's the evidence. This is why we picked them out. So this is, the data that they had, we've reconfirmed it, and importantly, links back to the science in the PubMed database. How awesome is that? So now suddenly, instead of saying, hey, do the following, we're saying, do the following, and here's why. Oh, and by the way, if you didn't know this, or this is updated knowledge, this is the best form of continuing medical education because it's at the point of care in the context of the patient. So from a clinical standpoint, I look at this, I look at the data, I improve my overall knowledge and understanding, and I'm treating patients that desperately need my help, and I'm the expert in terms of delivering that care. So that's fantastic from an incentive. From a patient perspective, I think a little bit more challenging, and certainly as you look at the spectrum of interventions, let's pick BMI as a perfect example. Very difficult. You and I both know how challenging it is to get those patients to interact with weight loss programs and reduce. It's really challenging. So I don't want to discount that, but at the same time, if you can show them a path, and I think the important thing here is give them one thing. If there's one thing that you could do and you can start to see some value, that's certainly been my personal journey of health is, every journey starts with a small step. I think that was a Gandhi quote. So, offer them that path and, importantly, walk with them. So, walking alongside. And then from the payer standpoint, I think the financial incentives here are very clear because we tie this back, particularly in the model. So everything that comes across with a dollar value of the opportunity for the saving, the ROI. We're looking at 200-300% ROI investments, and that's even after saying we're going to Uber the patient in, we're going to, actually deliver this sort of wellness healthcare activity for free. We're not charging for it, and ultimately, if you're at risk for that population, it's clear. So I think the incentives ultimately all line up in the ways that they need to, financial for the payers, clinical for the clinicians, and for the patients. It's all about being healthier and living more and better and healthier, productive lives.
Do you see this spreading to other kinds of practice settings? I mean, it's one thing to implement a system like this at an organization that has the scale of Banner Health, but is this ultimately something that's usable in smaller primary care settings?
I would say absolutely. I mean, clearly from our perspective, we have to get this out, and it's not difficult to discern that I'm excited about it, and for clear reason, but I think this potential for helping guide the process. And to be clear, one of the criticisms of this is, well, what about all the other patients? Well, I think we've got lots of other activities and other programs that focus on them. We're pretty good at focusing on the chronic illnesses, the very expensive conditions that typically consume 50%. We're not focusing on those. There's lots of programs that focus on wellness and keeping people healthy. Again, that's not ours. This is a very small, targeted approach, but I think important because what it does is it turns typically in any program that has any risk in their interaction with the patient pool, it turns red ink to black ink. It allows us to be profitable in this at-risk circumstance. And what
what you're describing is the challenge of, and maybe this is why it's appealing to a larger organization. You're talking about spending money in year one in order to save money in year 5 or year 10.
It's spending money in year one to save money in year one.
I guess my question is whether this requires that a patient be involved in a particular delivery system or payer for a length of time in order for the value to be seen. Part of our problem in this country is the way we seem to hop around from insurer to insurer as employer groups change their plans from year to year, or as people move around the country. The longevity issue with one provider or payer, if there is greater longevity, there's greater incentive on the part of the organizations to invest in the upfront expenses, or there have to be better incentives from the payment perspective to encourage that investment. I hear what you're saying, but I'm concerned that there may be an impediment to investment in the early years because folks may not see that benefit immediately. There's certainly, from what you described, there's certainly the opportunity for individual patients to be helped immediately. But I guess I'm thinking if they're helped immediately, the dollar savings may not be realized or may not be apparent until later. When we're talking about, you mentioned chronic care and the figure that we all know that maybe 50% of the healthcare dollar is spent on 5% of patients. Certainly, if we could reduce the cost impact from that 5% of patients, that would both benefit those patients by being given preventive care earlier and benefit the system by reducing costs overall.
It's fair commentary, but what I would say to you immediately, so just based on an analysis of a 40,000-member Medicare Advantage program, we identified 87 million risk gap. And some of that is projected future costs. And you're right, so if you flip into a different program, somebody else might accrue that. But there's a huge element of that is just inappropriately coded or classified risk. So these patients, they're typically the patients that walk in the door and, you interact with them and you go, good Lord, they need some care. And when you assess them, so that's what happens in that first instance when you reach out and say, hey, we'd like to bring you in and do some assessments. The first thing that happens is that you increase their risk score, the RAF score, the risk adjustment factor, because now suddenly you've got all of this additional data, and that immediately gives you a financial benefit. So that's, there's a whole program of companies that focus on that, but what they do is they do it once they've presented. So sometimes, later in the sequence. This is on January 1. They've signed up. We look at the data. We've got historical data, and we project those patients. We bring them in early and allow you to both adjust, so you get an immediate financial benefit from the adjustment to the RAF score, and then you also get the additional downstream benefit of more time of that patient healthier and costing you less. So, fair comment, David, but in our particular instance, we can demonstrate and show, and in fact, we're offering a program that is essentially offering that to people with a large enough cohort. We see this as being applied broader, but we've got to focus on the larger populations because that's where the biggest amount of return and opportunity is for those at-risk populations.
Of course. Well, we're coming to the end of our time, and I want to ask you my last question. Dr. Nick, if you were to wake up tomorrow and find yourself 5 years in the future, what is the one thing in healthcare that you would hope or expect has changed drastically?
I would hope beyond anything that healthcare organizations are doing a better job of keeping people healthy more proactively, rather than treating them after the fact when they become ill. The best analogy I have for that is the airline pilot that receives a radio call from Boeing in Seattle whilst he's on a flight from San Francisco to Washington, D.C., and they say, hey, we're seeing something in engine number 2, not sure what's going on, let's do some troubleshooting, but if nothing else, we should certainly get that focused on and looked at when you arrive at your destination. We do that in so many other industries. I mean, good Lord, the oil change people are calling me up to say, hey, your car needs an oil change. We are not doing that in healthcare. I want to see that for people so that we proactively prevent disease. It's better medicine and it's better cost-effective use of our healthcare dollars.
It's been a pleasure speaking with you today, Nick. I appreciate your time.
Always is. Really appreciate you putting me on the show, and always a pleasure to catch up. So thanks for having me.
You have been listening to Harlow on Healthcare. Join us at healthcarenowradio.com. Let's continue the conversation on building the future of healthcare together at #HarlowOnHC. I'm David Harlow, keeping the fire going and holding a seat open for you. Until next time.